Afternoon. My name's Stefan Weitz. It's good to be here. Today we're going to talk not about what I used to do, which is work on search, but really step back and say what is possible when you rethink search from first principles. So the premise of the talk, the premise of the book that I wrote was all about how what we build in search to do certain things actually will give us superpowers far beyond that which we know today. So what's happening? Well, the world is now born digital. This notion of an analog world that we then translate into digital has been almost totally eradicated. We are now this means of production because people like this guy on the left, the sensors that exist on all of the devices, the thing on the top is a drop cam, the thing in the center is a vessel, the bottom are sensors woven in clothing. All these things are contributing mass amounts of data into the cloud all around us. And more often than not, this data actually is commingled and tied together to a single identity. So the ability for us to begin to do interesting things with the mass amounts of data that are generated is profound. What's happening is that as a result of all that data being generated, we now see, and this number is wrong almost every single day it goes up, but in excess of 4 zettabytes of data will be created this year alone. What does that even mean? What's a zettabyte? Well, it means about 133 billion 32 gig iPads. That's how much data we're going to create this year alone. And even that number is kind of too hard to comprehend. What does that even mean? Well, if you took all those iPads and stacked them together, you would generate about 4 Great Walls of China. So that's how much we are now creating as a result of all these sensors, all the creation of things that we do with our devices, all the things we write, all the things we tweet, all the things we photograph, and that's just the stuff that we know about. So what's happening now is that we in the computer science world are able to start looking at all this data and to recreate the world as it is. So you can see here's a desk, for example, and what's happening as a result of all this data being pushed out there into the cloud, we're able to reassemble the components of that desk in real life. So we can see, for example, on the top how it got here by a Panamax cargo ship. We can see who it was designed by. We can see when it was purchased. We can see the refractory index of the surfaces. All these little discrete bits of data are now spread across the entire web. And the role of search in many cases is now to look at all these things, and reassemble them into coherent objects. It allows us now to physically model the real world in a digital platform. So what's that mean? Well, it means now that we are almost being outpaced by our systems. Search systems now have this ability, have this raw data to start making sense of the world in which they live. They're no longer simply servers running in a server room. The devices, the boxes, the intelligence behind it allow us to say they know their place in the actual world. In fact, a couple of my buddies down at Google actually ran an experiment a couple of years ago, about a year ago now, I guess it was. And traditionally, you'd have to tell a search system how to recognize a face. Well, suddenly, this search system began to recognize faces without explicitly being told how. That's a big deal. What it's saying is that the systems themselves have gained a level of, I hate to say intelligence, but a level of introspection that allows them to understand the world without us actually telling them how to do it. For example, now it's really hard, theoretically, if you asked a search engine today, should I put my cat in a shredder? It's a bad idea, generally. But a search system will give you back 5.5 million results of how to put a cat in a shredder. Because now search systems can say, well, actually, a cat is a living object, and if you put a cat in a shredder, it'll cut its flesh, and exsanguination can occur, and exsanguination means the thing dies, and dying is generally bad. It can ration its way through all these different variables and say, you probably shouldn't do that. Putting a cat in a shredder is a bad idea. So the ability for us to take all this digital jetsam and flotsam that's generated and rebuild the physical world allows us to have this level of power. And what's that do? What allows this thing, I think, to come true? This is Vinod Khosla, fairly big guy in the Valley, and his posit is this. In the next 20 years, machine learning will have more of an impact than mobile has. It's a pretty big statement, and only possible because the planet itself is now bathed in digital. And what's interesting, and if you ask yourself, what is machine learning? I'm sure some of you guys in the audience and gals in the audience know what this is, but generally it's the ability for machines to ration through tons of data and spot patterns and make sense of the real world. It's how Amazon can recommend what you should buy. It's how speech recognition can understand you. It's how traffic patterns and ways are calculated. All these things are basically examples of machine learning. To make it very concrete, when you were a child and your parents, there was a ball in the living room, for example, and the ball was there, and people would keep pointing at this thing and calling it ball, 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 and you would kick it, and you would handle it, and you would bounce it, and over time, you would begin to associate the physical characteristics of that object with the word ball. Very similar concept of machine learning, except now from just your parents actually saying, that's a ball, computers now have trillions of sources and trillions of bits of data to actually recognize that. So we've built this brain, if you will, inside of search. But it's not just that. It's not enough that this thing can sit there in containers and server rooms across the world and ration and think for itself. We've also built the other senses. So if we think about all the different things that we built in the industry over the last 5 years, it's pretty astounding. We have the ability to see. You've seen older things like Face.com be able to see faces, recognize faces, that sort of thing. You see things like Amazon being able to take a photo of an object and find that object in their catalog. We can now hear very well as well. Of course, older things like Shazam are still miracles of modern technology, but even things like the Motorola devices, where you can simply just talk from across the room and it'll hear you, it's always listening, is a good example of this new listening ability. Amazon Echo, another good example of being able to speak freely and have machines listen to you. The ability to converse in the lower right, from things as simple as Siri, Cortana, Google Now, all the way up to things like API.ai, AI systems like Vicarious, all these things are examples of how machines can actually interact with you versus having a one-way conversation. And finally, gesture. It's a big one. Far from just being a mouse and a keyboard, we now have systems like Kinect or RealSense from Intel or Leap Motion, or all these different devices that allow you to have a more natural interaction with your machine. So we've now not just built the brain, we've now built all these different ways that the brain can consume and respond to natural user interactions. That's pretty exciting when you think about the ability now to combine that with the rest of us. And that's kind of the point of the entire book, is that people have thought about search for so long as a way to find information, which is absolutely a very, very valid way of doing something. But the fun part now is that we can begin to see how you can bridge the best of humanity with the best of technology. And we can do it because we have different ways of interacting with this technology. So I like to call search now the hinge that binds these two things together. It really is the corpus callosum, for those of you who love physiology, that connects the two hemispheres of the brain. And if you ask why I think this is so important, it's pretty interesting, I think. If you think back to the 90s when Kasparov was playing Deep Blue, which was IBM's big chess supercomputer. And eventually Kasparov lost. And if it were me and I lost to a machine, I probably would storm out of there in a fit of rage and walk out of the Watson Center angrily, but he actually didn't. He said, I think we can do something together here. So he and IBM came together and worked together to build really a hybrid version of Kasparov and Deep Blue. And the resulting combination of those two amazing brains could then beat any other grandmaster in chess and any other supercomputer. So the ability, this notion that it's going to be either or, that the machines will take over or will persevere, I think is flawed. The real ability, the real power of what we built in the last 15 years in the search engines is the ability to augment us with these magical powers. So what's that look like? Well, the first thing is that search will augment reality. It will enhance reality. This is a screen grab from the Terminator, probably not the best example to use for this talk, but you get the idea. In this case, as Arnold is looking out at the motorcycle, he sees what model it is and whatnot. And the same thing happens with Google Glass. I know it's discontinued now, but still, I still have mine. And the ability to simply walk around and look at a bale grist mill in New Hampshire and have that information overlaid into your vision is no longer science fiction. It's happening today. Things like Magic Leap, things like HoloLens from Microsoft are taking this even one step further to literally understand your physical environment and use search algorithms to augment that with real information. Things like Estimo, another great example, Bluetooth low-energy beacons that can be placed around physical environments. Suddenly, as you're walking through a store, as you're approaching an object on a shelf, as you're in your house walking around, the devices and the physical spaces around you light up with information. You can imagine very, very soon walking up to a pair of shoes on a shelf and deciding and having the systems behind your digital persona tell you if those shoes will go with the outfit that you bought last week. Because it knows what the shoes are, knows who you are, knows what you purchased. We can begin to stitch all these graphs together in very interesting ways. It'll also enhance just reality. This is a good one. The Xbox One has a thing called Kinect. It's a very, very interesting sensor. Just to be clear, it does not do this today, but the capabilities are there such that if you're watching a movie, for example, from across the room, Kinect can detect your heart rate. It can detect if you have certain muscles that are twitching. It can detect the veins in your forehead. All these things that can lead it to make conclusions around how much you're actually enjoying that film. So rather than you telling Netflix you like Wings of a Dove, in reality now we have the ability to, from across the room, detect if you actually do or not. So the ability for us to augment the reality around us with these search algorithms is pretty fascinating. This is one I love too, called MindMeld. And this actually is an application which sits there and listens to your conversations over Skype or other chat systems. And as it's listening, it's hearing objects, it's hearing characteristics, it's hearing things. In this case, it was a conversation about where we should go when I visited San Francisco. And as we talked, you could see things like someone mentioned the slanted door, somebody mentioned the ferry building, somebody mentioned Golden Gate Bridge. And as we're just having a conversation back and forth, MindMeld is listening to this whole thing and picking out those objects, picking out those interesting areas that it should highlight and save for later so we can make that conversation make sense later. So search has this amazing ability to enhance the reality around us, which I'm very excited about. The second thing it's going to do is search will enhance us. I kind of mentioned that earlier. This ability for search to augment our natural human abilities is coming very, very, very soon. I don't think we're going to see robotic eyes in the next 3 years, but certainly we'll have senses like that very quickly. So for example, this is a little device called the autographer. Now granted, you probably wouldn't wear this around a lot, but we're seeing these things shrink every single day into the temple of your glasses or objects in your hands. This thing actually, if you do wear it around your neck on a lanyard, kind of like our badges, it'll record your entire day. People you spoke to, it'll take images of where you were at, videos of where you were at, locations of where you were at, how hot it was, the time of day it was. All that information is captured as long as you have it on. So you can imagine we're capturing now terabytes of information about your physical existence as you go about your day. You can never, as humans, possibly process all that data. But a project on the right-hand side called DeepMind is a project where it takes all that data and attempts to figure out what it is that you did. And you could ask then questions of the system, things like, where was I last week when I had a conversation with that guy who was working on an AI startup in India? Those types of questions, because this is able to actually parse through all that data, it can begin to retrieve those moments in your life and help you never forget. And that's the point here, this ability to actually never forget without the concomitant craziness that comes with that, because our brains actually can't handle all that information. Search will also do things like this. It'll make every publication your publication. So rather than if it's a story on ISIS terror, for example, you likely have already read a ton of information about that. So how can these technologies actually refactor all those 95 stories down to the 49 you actually have to read to catch up on where you were? Even better, inside of stories, the ability for us to relay out or cut things out you don't need to know will make actually reading much simpler. Newsela, which is an educational startup, is doing this right now. It'll also enhance our ability to know people. So here you've got an app that was just purchased by LinkedIn about a month ago called Refresh. And this was all about, before you walk into a meeting, knowing everyone in that meeting, knowing what they liked, where they went to school, what sports teams they enjoyed, where they were last weekend, public photos they had. So the ability for all this digital data to be distilled down to a singular individual object and given back to you, I think is very interesting and very helpful as a demonstration of how search can augment our natural abilities of recognition. Finally, search is going to connect the physical and the virtual worlds more effectively. This is a great example, I think. If you, let's say, lost your charging cable, and we all know what that will do to us, but you lost your charging cable today, to figure out a new charging cable would take you a number of steps you have to do on your own. You have to figure out what kind of cable you need if you're a neophyte. You have to figure out where you can buy it. You have to get there. You have to purchase it. Big pain. There's no reason for this. Search will and can connect both physical and virtual. So, for example, I just now ask a query of my device. I need a cable for my phone. The search engine knows who I am, knows the phone I'm on, queries the back end, figures out that I'm on. In this case, I'm on a Nokia phone. Great, it knows that model number, it knows the connector. It can query my calendar and say he's leaving for Las Vegas in 3 hours, so I need to make sure I get that cable to him before he has to leave for the airport. It can then query the web and say, okay, given all that information, what are the places around here that'll have that cable for him, for his phone in stock that I can go pick up in that time window? And finally, I can issue a TaskRabbit API call to have a person dispatched to go pick up that cable, deliver it to my current location, all before getting the plane. Sounds science fiction-y. There is nothing I described that can't be done today via APIs that exist out there. So it's the notion of us being able to connect our virtual intents to our physical worlds is something search is uniquely able to do going forward. So what does the near future search look like? This is hard to read, so it's not too bad. Hard to read for me, at least. But a search query will not be words. It's going to be any change in state. It could be you waking up in Macau tomorrow. It could be the clock ticking over to 4 o'clock. It could be a cloud in the sky. That will be a search query going forward. Search will not have to listen to what you say to know what it is you mean, because there will be so much data about you and your preferences and your skills. It'll be able to say, he's asking for this. What he means is actually this. It will it'll understand and take action in the real world rather than just observing it. We just looked at that with the cable example. Search will appear when and where you need it, even if you don't know you need it. Today, search is still a very conscious act. You still go to a search engine, you still go to a search box, you still figure out how to query for something. That will all go away. We're already seeing examples of that, of course, on our devices. Search will, I think I'm most excited about, will contribute to human knowledge and not simply index it. So today, searches are big indices. They're big indexers, if you will, of the web. What we're seeing now is the ability for search to begin to make sense of the actual world. It can start to derive knowledge about the world, derive facts about the world, derive synthetic things that we as humans can do naturally, but until now, systems like search couldn't. And finally, search will help us simplify our lives. It'll perform tasks we don't want to do. It'll let us make better decisions. And ultimately, if it all works correctly, steer us away from actions that are not to our benefit. So big, haughty goals, I know. But these are all things that we're seeing happen today in the space and are rapidly accelerating as we have, frankly, better ML algorithms and better data to work with. So what are the benefits of all this? We've gone through kind of where we're at, what's going to happen, and what search will look like. The benefits are pretty interesting. The first is we'll be able to stop multitasking as much. We'll have this beautiful notion of efficiency. And the reason for that is simple. Nobody loves today to have to manage a very complex calendar of going to buy ice cream for the party tonight, picking up your daughter at math camp, making sure you avoid traffic because there's an accident on I-5. Those are all things that cloud our minds. The notion of having to wade through 150 bad straight-to-DVD movies on Netflix queue is a waste of our time. So the ability for search to know more about us and the real world can begin to remove some of those unnecessary tasks that we do today that consume cycles that could otherwise be spent on doing more productive activities. That's the first thing. Second thing is this notion of information symmetry. Today, we're seeing rapid declines in information symmetry. That's a bad thing. In fact, the 2001 Nobel Prize actually went to a guy who talked about information asymmetry being a precursor to a full-on capitalistic crash. It's a bad thing. You see Max's new startup today called Affirm just raised a bunch of money to look at part of this. How do you actually provide better information to both sides of a negotiation, of a discussion, of an argument? And by providing that level of transparency, that level of symmetry, better decisions can be made. The third thing is, along the same lines, hopefully, this level of information, this level of digital democracy will allow us to make better decisions in the public realm. There'll still be those histrionic commentators, and there'll still be some folks who are on both sides of the fringe advocating certain positions. But when data is clear, when probabilistic outcomes are clear, and when you can begin to regress back to say, I am confident if this happens, we know from data, this is the likely next thing that will happen. If you have all that in place, public policy, health policy, transportation policy, things that we can quantify, will be actually much more rational. We might even know for sure that the New England guys did deflate the ball. True story. But of course, this all is predicated on trust. It's all predicated on us as humans accepting machines to do our bidding without us actually asking. There's a lot of work by Thaler and Sunstein looking at how you can actually nudge behaviors in certain ways using this technology. Humans are really bad at changing our behaviors. If we get to a bad behavior, we'll keep doing it. Same thing with search. Today, we think of search as one thing, but in reality, it's shifting. We have to adapt to that. So how do we adapt to that really well? Well, you can imagine in the very, very near future, I'm sitting in a restaurant. I want to order a cheeseburger with blue cheese or something like that, lots of sodium. Search could very simply look at where I'm at, what restaurant I'm in, look at the menu, look at all the items in the menu, figure out the likely calorie counts, the likely sodium content, the likely fat content using a publicly available API for that kind of thing, and actually subtly guide me towards the right decision. Knowing that I have a 1.5x, 1.57x likelihood to contract gout in my lifetime, thanks to my DNA, I could say, you shouldn't eat this much sodium. We're going to go ahead and point you to a nice salad instead. So the ability to take all that data, me at a DNA level, the food at a molecular level, combine it all in real time and give me a nudge to find the right decision, I think is pretty fascinating. So what's holding it back? I only have 15 seconds, so I can't get into all of it. It's in the book if you care about it. What's holding it back, though, are a lot of reality. That's a lot of reality. There's a lot of money made in search today. There's a lot of money in the way search operates today. There's a lot of trust issues with technology. A lot of privacy issues, obviously, in this space. And so there's all these islands of data, all these islands of private data, which have to be rectified before any of this can happen. It's not easy, and I'm not by any means saying it's a slam dunk. But I do believe if we can bridge the gap, if we can show the benefit, show the power of this new reality using search as our back end, humanity will thank us all for it. Thanks very much.